Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am joined by Ryan Cahill, author of Holy Shit, That's a Terrible Start. I
The Bound
forgot
and the
the
Broken. The Bound and the Broken. I'm not
Bound in
letting
the
you trip
Broken.
up. We got this.
I was
We got
trying to
this.
think of the book title, and it just slipped my mind. The very first book
Of Blood
title
and
that I just
Fire.
read, A Blood and Fire. Thank you. I was going to say A Blood and Fire. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Uh,
This could go really poorly or really fantastically.
so AJ's off to a great start already. For those of you that don't know me, my name is AJ Rettger. I'm the author of Oathbreaker. And thank you so much for joining me, Ryan, today. It's
Yeah, thanks
honestly
for having me.
a pleasure. Oh, not a problem. So we'll start with Of Blood and Fire. I got the name down now. What is like, give us like kind of like the elevator pitch of the book and the start of the series.
It's a funny one. I never actually made an elevator pitch because I think there's certain types of books that don't need them. So like Game of Thrones doesn't have an elevator pitch. Game of Thrones is like crazy shit. They kill loads of people. It's fantasy. There's dragons, and that's kind of like with me too. I think it doesn't have this cool hook. It's not like a really major twist on stuff. It's very much like classic fantasy. That's what I wanted to write. It's kind of like classic fantasy with kind of a modern voice, and I wanted to kind of take all the old tropes and all the kind of stuff that I loved growing up and kind of make it accessible for adults now. And so like people who are like our age now come back in and go, oh yeah, like that kind of makes me feel like you know like I did when I was a kid. Makes me read back, but it's appropriate now as opposed to just going back and reading all the older books you read as a kid. It's kind of where I wanted to go, at least with the first book, make it really accessible and kind of people who are new to fantasy as well could jump into it and the prose is accessible and it's not just crazy and doesn't scare you off kind of thing was where I wanted to go with it.
Yeah, that's actually what I really got out of the book. Is like it was just like when I was reading it, I was like, man, this is some old school, like revitalized
Yeah,
classic fantasy. And I'm like, this is sick. Like you don't see it. Everyone's got all these twists and curves, myself included, trying to put in like
yeah.
this is just like an awesome classic fantasy tale again, just
I
more
appreciate that. And
modernized.
I think like as I go through it, and like in the second book, I do add. There's a lot more. Like there's loads of stuff. Like there's loads of things that happen in the first book for me that you shouldn't really think is anything. But then in the second book, you'll
Mm.
realize there's a big twist. And that's what I wanted to do. But I want the first book. Thank you. I just got brought a coffee.
Yeah.
Um, but with the first book was making it accessible and kind of I wear my influences on my arm with it. Like there's no, it's not like I'm I'm not hiding it at all. It's definitely I want it to have tropes. Like tropes are why you love fantasy. Like is in you take the tropes out of a genre, the genre doesn't exist anymore. So when people rag on tropes, I'm just like, what's your problem? Like is in if you go and you read a cozy romance and they don't get together at the end, it's not a cozy romance. Like
Right.
those tropes are there for a reason. I think it's just as long as you take the time to do them right, then that's what matters. But getting rid of them entirely, like even subverting a trope, is just like I love subverting tropes. They're great, and when people do them, but it's not that much different than a trope. Like when you have the angry mercenary and you change their gender, like it's still the angry mercenary. You didn't change too much, um, and it's still fantastic. Like that trope
Right.
is lovely. The grizzled old mercenary who's bitter with the world and has to raise a young child, which is used in like everything.
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic trope that almost everyone loves.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because that's exactly one of the tropes in my next book. The grizzled
But
old
it's a great,
mercenary.
but it's a great trope. Like, and I think there's that worn out difference between a trope and a cliche. I think a cliche is when a trope becomes too much, when a trope is used all the time. But a trope in itself shouldn't have a negative connotation. A trope is just a like a tenet of a genre. Like as in having fantasy books set in a medieval, non-technology advanced setting, um, started as a trope and became a tenet. Like now, basically, if you write fantasy, that is like it has to be in that not medieval European. Obviously, there's Asian inspired fantasy, loads of other fantasy, but it almost has to be swords.
Mm-hmm.
Even you go to Red Rising, and it's like a mix with sci-fi, and you go into the future, there's close combat weapon. So it has to have certain things. It started as a trope and just became like a core. You need to have these things.
Right.
I'm all for tropes. Tropes are great, just as long as they're done cool.
Done right. Yeah. I think it is. Yeah. Like you said, it's a fine line between a cliche and a trope. It's
Yeah,
a little
one hundred
delicate
percent.
dancing act that you gotta, as an author, navigate, which is tough.
Yeah,
I mean, I had one in my first book, Oathbreaker. Before I published it, I had my lovely mentor, Sky. She read everything I sent to her, and basically, before halfway through the book, there's this big battle with a monster, and she's like, "This
Yeah.
is way too much like Lord of the Rings Balrog." Like it was like almost
Yeah.
eerily similar. And I'm like, oh, okay. She's like, yeah, you should definitely change it. Like I had a fire demon, like it was in caves. It was almost like
Yeah.
fucking the exact. And I didn't try to. It was like, oh, I think that was kind of a cool trope. But
Yeah,
they,
and that can definitely happen. Like you can get stuff that's just so close to it. But I always find it's when there's sometimes you can tell when someone's trying to say and compare your book to something in a negative way, but they clutch at straws. So it'd be like, oh, it's clearly taken from this. There's an old mentor. And I'm like, yeah, that's most fantasies. And they go down a mountain pass. I'm like, that's also most fantasies. And, their parents die. And I'm like, yeah, because that's kind of used in most fantasies as a way for the young protagonist to not be tied to their home. I think it can be a bit weak sometimes. And if I see someone do a new thing, that's really cool. But like there are certain beats that a lot of fantasies have. If you pick a particular type, if you have coming of age story, there will be beats that people are just used to seeing. And if you don't hit them, the coming of age story doesn't feel the same to them.
right.
Because if you're going to do a coming of age story, for me, when you do a coming of age story, you want the reader to feel comforted because that's what they're used to. They go back and they read fantasy coming of age stories to feel that comfort of when you're a kid and you're reading these stories and you believe you can be the hero. And if you don't hit those tropes and don't hit those beats, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't
Right.
feel like what that trope should feel like to me, anyway.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Like my book, Oathbreaker, was very much a coming of age story, but not a coming of age story in that one. Like it doesn't hit those beats, but
Yeah.
like the whole plot of it is kind of like the backbone of a coming of age story, but then it's just twisted and gnarled and grimdark as shit and
Yeah.
thrown down the rabbit hole. But it is. So speaking of which, I gotta say your main character, Kalen, and my main character, Mario, I'm like, these guys would be best friends. They would just love each other. They're like eerily similar, and I'm like, man, this is like, oh, they're like twin flames.
No, but I think it's always like you get those protagonists, and I think there's different types of obviously different types of protagonists, but like you kind of have that altruistic vision. I think I haven't actually got to read yours yet. I try to read books, and I just can't right now. Like as in, I want so much to, but I'll read like 5 paragraphs, and then I'm like, oh man, I should be writing. I should be writing. I should be writing.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to the level yet where I'm able to step away and read the way I want to read, and I need to kind of set some time for that. But I think like I know for me with Kaylin, like is in I wanted to create this kind of, the character who wants to be good, and has his kind of like not so much an altruistic view on life given to him from his parents, but then also has his own issues, like as a serious fucking anger problem, and he's gonna need to address it. And there's those getting those flaws in there kind of makes it unique. But I always love those type of protagonists. It's always my favorite when I read, and to have someone there who kind of like, even though might do some horrible things or bad things, kind of really wants to go for the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love that noble character. It'll always be one of the tropes that I really like.
Yeah, I love it. He's like my character's naive as shit, and I feel like Kalen was pretty naive too at times. Yep. And I was just like, oh yeah, and like
if you have an 18-year-old that isn't naive,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like Mario in Oathbreaker, he was like not apart from Kalen, Mario's a fucking idiot. He's literally bailed out by the people he travels with time and time and time and time again. Kind of like I got the idea from the Hunger Games with Katniss Everdeen, how she's always just bailed out. Is how I read it. I was like, Hamish bails her out, and Peeta, I believe, bails her out all the time.
I've listened to a lot of Brandon Sanderson talking about writing, and he has this idea of there's being 3 sliders, right? So if your character to like be a good character, for people that actually like want to read your character, there's 3 sliders. They have to be either likable, competent, or have agency. So you can have like one slider always up to the top, and that will kind of keep you floating. But for the character to develop, the sliders need to move. So like you'll see like Katniss Everdeen was probably high agency at the start and reasonably competent, maybe not so likable. And then the sliders shift and change as they go. And I think he used like Star Wars as a comparison. We've got like the Han Solo, incredibly competent, really high agency, and is an absolute dickhead. So like that sliders down the bottom. But they change. He becomes nicer. And as he becomes nicer, his agency changes and he kind of follows more. He follows Leia and he follows Luke. And Luke is really likable, but has no agency. He doesn't want to leave Tatooine, and he has no competency. But then eventually, as you get to like the third film, Luke is slightly darker, and that like ability comes down, and all of a sudden now he's really competent, and his agency's completely changed. And I think that's a really cool way of looking at it for me. Like you have to have at least one of them. You can't have a character who sits around and does nothing, is incapable of doing anything, and is really sour and sarcastic. You have to have one. If you're sour and sarcastic, he needs to be really fucking good at something.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a really cool way of looking at it.
Yeah, I haven't listened to much Sanderson talk, and I haven't even read much of Sanderson's books because I look at them and I get anxiety by how thick they are. And I'm just like, I'm like, oh no, it's going to take me so long to read that.
What I would definitely do is I'd hugely advise. I thought it was fantastic. He does a lecture. I can't remember which university it is, or he does like a lecture on creative writing. But last year, or was the year before, he decided that he'd upload all the lecture series for the whole year onto YouTube. And it's fantastic. Like, so good. And he gets like Mary Robinette Kowal in, and she does a class on it as well, on like short stories and the mice quotient, and it's really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Like it's so eye-opening the way he approaches things, and the things that he kind of breaks down, the things that your head will do naturally. Like when you write, like you mightn't think about it when you write, but it's what's happening. And it shows you how to control it and go through it. It's really, really cool. Really good resource for like writing craft.
Right. Awesome. Speaking of I think you mentioned earlier wearing your influences on your sleeve. Who are your writing influences? Who are the guys
so many
or girls that inspire you?
Yeah, and actually, because that's what it is. And I think a lot of the time, I think because I have a boy with a dragon, and people go, "Oh my God, Aragon," and I'll be like, "Yeah, there's definitely an influence there. I've read Aragon when I was younger. I really liked the books, and I actually hated how that series ended. Like really hated it. But I did love the books. But probably wouldn't be as big an impact on me, I wouldn't feel, as Temeraire. Naomi Novik has that series, like huge series of books, kind of like dragons in the Napoleonic times, and like Napoleon has like an army of dragons, each one with specific abilities that they use basically, and she integrates them into the war machine. It's so unique, so cool. I think from a world building perspective, like Naomi and Brandon Sanderson are definitely up there for me, and Anne McCaffrey. From writing style, I think my biggest one probably like John Gwynne. I love John Gwynne's books, and I think his action and the way he writes those characters is definitely a big influence on me. Like massive, massive, massive.
All right. David, we're going to derail the conversation. David wants me to toot my own horn a little bit here.
Yeah.
So
toot it.
Oathbreaker is a grimdark fantasy that follows Mario, who is a young guy. His dad is a legendary knight who mysteriously went missing. And Mario's basically, in order to become a knight, he has to complete a first deed. He has to then go out and complete his deed, and he runs into monsters and bandits and a whole bunch of shit, and relies on the people he recruits to bail him out time and time again until eventually he gets his deed done, and he kind of changes as a person at the end of the book. I don't want to give anything away.
What I'm interested in, or so you described it as a grimdark fantasy, and this is like probably the big contentious topic at the minute, is like, what is grimdark to you? Like, why is your book grimdark? Is it because it's, well, I'm not going to lead it. You work away.
Well, I didn't know what grimdark was when I started writing. I just wanted to write a darker fantasy. Like I knew I didn't want everything hunky-dory, kind of nice, and I kind of wanted to explore that darker side. And then my mentor Sky and a couple people, my beta readers, said, "This is grimdark, man. Like this is grim." I'm like, "Oh, okay. What is that genre?" I had to Google search it.
Yeah.
And so, like, I guess I don't know. It's tough to. I don't really know what grimdark is, other than it's.
I don't think anyone does.
Fantasy. It's just darker fantasy. Like Oathbreaker, I think why it got classified in grimdark is because there's a lot of gore and violence.
Yeah,
and I think that's why it moved on.
It's interesting. I find it really interesting because especially in my second book. So my second book, I think, levels up a lot more. It's nearly twice as long, way darker. But I'd never classified as grimdark, and I suppose it's something for me that's really interesting because, I view grimdark less as a, like, for me, loads of gore and stuff is like 18 plus, you know, or not even 18 plus, just like a mature reader. Like you can be 15, 16 and enjoy that sort of stuff. But I think for me, I think grimdark is more like an outlook, like as in when you look at the world, like is it a slightly more cynical view on the world, a slightly more not always nihilistic. There's loads of ways of looking at it, and I think there's like 50 different definitions of what grimdark could be. But I think sometimes people get scared of grimdark because they think when they hear the word, they're like, "Oh no, this book's just going to be horrible, and everyone's going to be miserable, and there's nothing in it." And that's, I think, for me, I found like a middle ground that I was talking to you guys here. Someone came, I think it was Justin T. Call. So he said a term called grim heart, and I don't think he said he hadn't invented it, but I just love the term because it's like grim heart to me is kind of what I think you're saying with your book, and what I think I wanted to get with my book is that, you know, it's not just all play nicely and sunshine. It is gritty and it can be gruesome and bad things happen. And but at the same time, for me, there's an overarching theme in my books for hope, and that people still have passion and they care for each other, and they want to be there for each other. And even when the bad things happen, they support each other. But there's still that grittiness. Like, you know, someone snaps a bone, you're going to hear the bone snap. And there's going to be dark things. People are going to lose people, and people are going to get in really bad places. But that there's heart in it, and it's not all about just everything being bad. And I think that's like that middle ground. So I've started liking that kind of moniker of grim heart instead of grim dark.
Yeah.
Might not fit for you, but
no, it definitely, like, as you're explaining, like, yeah, that's exactly my book. Like, it's got this gritty world where people are shitty, but there's still that overarching sense of hope that you can do good, that you will have an impact in the world.
And I think, to me, that is the difference, because I think it's that mix of what they used to call noble bright. So they have the two fantasies, like one where, you know, one heroic character and everything they do is always for the virtuous and the good, and, you know, it's this good versus evil. And then I think as soon as you blur the lines and it's not good versus evil, people say it's grimdark. So as soon as, like, you know, you can't clearly tell who the villain is, and they're like, "Oh, it's grimdark." Like, no, it's just realistic. It's like gritty and it's dark and things are happening. But this character and all these other characters, there is hope, and they do love each other, and they do have passion and compassion, and I like that blend of it all. Personally, that's my favorite type of book to read.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and like people who have read my book say they compare me to Sapkowski, or like the world I built, to Andrew Sapkowski, who wrote the Witcher series, and like to me that blows me away because he is why I started writing. He's like the number one guy. So like, and I will admit the world is very similar to The Witcher because that's kind of what I wanted to do. And it was kind of like my take on the Witcher world. And then, so yeah, people saying it's very Witcher-like and it's very much like the Witcher, I absolutely lose it. Like, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's good. It's in a great way. Yeah.
Yeah. I lose it in a great way.
Get that, yeah. But like, there's those things. It's like art inspires art, and there's a difference. Like, and I think anyone out there who thinks they're doing something original, like, as in you are, but you are always standing on the shoulders of giants. And sometimes you might lean a little bit further away from the influence, and sometimes you might lean into the influence. And I think as long as you're aware what you're doing, then it can come across really well. So like if that's what you're trying to create, and you're like, I love this world, I love the gritty style, I love the monster hunting, I love the fucking, like, I love the knights in armor and powerful soldiers, and like, lean into it. And as long as you're leaning into it, that's a good thing for me.
Yeah. Awesome. So one thing I want to ask you, sorry, we have more questions from David. Would you like a movie or TV show done with your books? Why or why not, please?
Oh, had you asked me that like 6 months ago, I would have said yes. Now I'm 50-50, and I saw the Wheel of Time book, and it's like a hot take, but it's a hot take that isn't a hot take, because I think I think Twitter, actually, in particular, a bit of a cesspit for this stuff right now. I think if you love the Wheel of Time series on Twitter, there will be a group of people who hate you. And if you hate the Wheel of Time series on Twitter, there will be a group of people who hate you. And there doesn't seem to be much room for nuance in whether you like it or not. But that had a big impact on me for whether I would want my book to be adapted. And now I don't really think I would. Because there were some good parts in that one. And as its own piece of storytelling fiction on TV, it was good. I thought it was okay. Like, as in, the cinematography was quite good, and the story separate from the books, although I still felt was really, really rushed and suffered from serious choppiness. I think it's when I compared it to the book, and I was like, I think people kept saying, "Oh, it's an adaptation. It's an adaptation." I'm like, and they're like, "It's a new turning of the wheel." I'm like, that's a great saying, but I wasn't excited for the last 10 years to watch someone tell a different turning of the wheel. I wanted to
Mhm.
see the turning of the wheel that I loved. That's still a great, lovely piece of TV, and if everyone loves it, that's fantastic. But I think watching that change and how much of the world was changed, and even basic stuff like the foundation of the magic system, like I went, look, it's a nice piece of TV, but I would be quite sad if I gave away the rights to my book and then I was excited to watch it in a visual medium and the story and stuff was changed in that way. Um, that's so I think that would be my answer for that. I really don't know now. I'd
Yeah.
have to see it. I'm going, oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I watched Wheel of Time, and I kind of felt the same way. And one thing that I watched the Witcher series, and that's my favorite books, and they've changed
Yeah,
a lot. Lauren Hisberg, the
there's
creative
oh yeah,
kind of lead
even
on that.
yeah. Sorry, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, and they just completely changed it. They've added storylines that I'm not a fan of, and I'm
Yeah,
just like, mm. I'm like, yeah. So it kind of pains me to see like a good book adapted in that way and kind of twisted and turned
like it's
to.
interesting for me because like even like with like Eskel in the new one, and you've watched the
Mhm.
most recent seasons,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
obviously he's a major character, and they just bang, all right. But for me, I enjoyed The Witcher a lot more than I enjoyed The Wheel of Time because they did change things. They definitely changed things. But I think like the serious heart of a lot of the stuff is there, and even like you go to the magic system and you still have all your signs, and they've separated it, and like that real passion between Yennefer and Ciri and Geralt is there, and I think for me, although there's definitely flaws and there will always be, I don't think there's a single adaptation that someone who's passionate about it will always love at
Yeah.
every part. But I think it was a better adaptation for me. I enjoyed it more. And I even like, even the first season, although it was choppy, like literally bang, bang, bang all over the place, that's the way the book was. So like it's
Mhm.
a series of short stories. So they didn't mix together properly. And that was, I think that's a really difficult thing to adapt. Um,
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
I really like that they did that. Whereas the Wheel of Time, people keep saying, what's it like? Oh, it's so hard to adapt because it's 350,000 words and huge amount of pages. I'm like, yeah, but half of that is describing clothing. So as soon as you come to a visual medium, you lose half the book
Mhm.
because you don't have to describe that stuff anymore. You just put someone in the clothes.
I can't remember who the author is, but Handmaid's Tale.
Mm,
When they adapted her, she basically, from what I've understood, it's again all hearsay, but she's basically controlled creative control of her show, and like
yeah,
basically she has final veto of her show, and that's why Handmaid's Tale is apparently so close to the books. I haven't read the books or seen the show,
yeah.
so I don't know, but that's the one thing I've heard that is an adaptation who's like lawful true to the books is Handmaid's Tale.
And I think there's a middle ground. Like you don't, and some people will say it like with the Wheel of Time and stuff. They're like, oh, and you can't be too lawful to the books, because of those reasons, because it's too long and it's this and it's that, and I would kind of argue that a lot of the extra context disappears in the visual medium, so it's not that difficult. But there's some things that shouldn't be lawfully done and can't be. So like if you go to like the Maze Runner, one of the biggest things in the Maze Runner is the telepathic communication between two main characters, but you can't really portray that properly. So that's gone instantly. Um, and even I think the Hunger Games, I think the movies lost a lot of the emotion, especially of the third book of the Hunger Games,
Yes.
because a lot of it's in Katniss's head, and
Hmm.
it's a lot of it is her battle with her own mental health and with her sanity and with everything going on, and it's just so hard to portray that on TV,
Hmm.
or in a movie theater. So I could never give out to somebody for not making that exactly as it should be,
Yeah.
because it's impossible.
Jahan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. He says, I agree with, or she says, I agree with the Wheel of Time show doesn't do a great job maintaining the themes of the show. There's nothing about gender relations or country bumpkins being a fish out of water.
Yeah, and I do get that. I think gender's been a big thing for the show. And I think the reason it's been a big thing for the show is because I think Robert Jordan was really ahead of his time. And like I do think some of the stuff he would love some of the changes, and that's just a personal opinion. He was really ahead of his time. Like and he did a thing in the books where he basically, which I loved, he obviously flips the patriarchy and into a matriarchy for a lot of it. Um but he has this thing where like all of the women talk about men as if they're idiots, right? But all of the men do the same, and they've done it. I think he did it really well. Like they bicker with each other, basically like, oh, men, and then the men walk out and go, oh, women, and I like what he did there. So yeah, but I do think a lot of the heart and stuff of what I loved was gone, and the country bumpkins thing, that's a big thing for me because I feel like by the 7th or 6th or 7th episode, even the 8th episode, I didn't really care about the characters. There was no development of the characters. Like instead of us learning to love Perrin and Matt, they just destroyed Matt's dad and made it look like Matt was a great guy, and then used that as character development. And then they got Perrin to stick an axe in a wife he never had, and used that as character development. And I think if we had have learned, it's like, you know what, it's showing, not telling. And I usually don't agree with that advice in writing because it's show sometimes and tell sometimes when it's right. That's actual advice. But instead of us learning why Perrin is scared of his own aggression and really taking that journey with him as a character, we just had him hack his wife, and like now he's scared of an axe, and it's not the same. So it seems like it's a good way to jump forward and get you to understand why he's scared of violence, but it's not the same because you didn't take the journey with him. You didn't watch him struggle, and when you watch him struggle and you learn these things, you care about the characters. And I think that's the thing for me is I love those characters so much that to watch them in the show and not love them as much in the show was weird for me because I didn't watch them take those journeys. Right. So, like, I think by the 8th episode, you've barely even seen Perrin, and even like Rand and even Egwene. I loved Nynaeve and Lan in the show. I think they were better in the show. The characters were way better in the show, but they got a lot of screen time. Whereas the other ones really suffered. That was a big thing for me. But yeah, that's the thing with adaptations, unfortunately.
According to David's daughter, you look like a footballer. So
thanks, Aaron. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I mean, growing up in, like, I'm sure everyone who's listening can tell I'm uber Canadian with my accent. Footballer to me is like not like, I guess I have to remember and think, oh, soccer, right? Of course,
yeah.
But 90% of the world calls it, and not our backwards sport that really doesn't involve feet at all.
At all. That's what really worries me. I don't know how that even happened.
Yeah, I don't know either. Like, you literally use your feet for like 2 downs of the game.
There is one kicker.
Yeah, one kicker. And then, so yeah, it's really messed up. But back to books.
Catch and run ball.
Catch and run ball. Sean's wondering, what's one new thing that your series brings to the genre?
Yeah, like, I think for me, I wasn't really too focused on bringing something new to the genre. But maybe because I think not every book has to do that. I think sometimes just a great book is a great book. And if you could bring a great book in, that's what it brings. It brings a great new world for someone to get lost in. And I think what I wanted to do, what's new for me, is I wanted to bring that classic fantasy feel, like I said earlier, and when I was chatting to you, AJ, is I want to bring that classic fantasy feel to a wider audience. And I wanted to kind of go to people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, who can read that classic fantasy without feeling like it's for kids. And can kind of read it and get absorbed in it, like the way I did when I was a child. So I wanted to bring a sense of escapism and a fantasy world, especially in the times we're in now, to people who maybe are new to fantasy. Like my fiance has never read fantasy, and she reads quite a lot, and I was really scared for her to read my book because I was like, she's just gonna fucking hate it. But she read it really quickly, and she probably just wouldn't have said anything if she hated it. She would have just like disappeared and floated off into the darkness. But that one thing she said, and one thing I've heard from quite a lot of people, and especially from Instagram, because fantasy isn't as big on Instagram. It's usually a lot of romance, a lot of YA, and a couple of them had read the book. Said, "Oh, it's my first time really reading like hardcore high fantasy, like proper jumping into weird place names, elves and dwarves, and so like I really loved it. Like the writing was really accessible, and the story was great to get lost in, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to, I suppose, create a portal into the fantasy world for new readers and for adult readers as well, was kind of what I wanted to bring to the genre.
Right, kind of like that gateway book. I said, oh, Ryan Cahill's A Blood and Fire started it all. Started my fantasy obsession.
If someone says that to me, my whole day is made. That is like everything to me. And someone says that, because that's exactly what I want it to be a gift. I want to be like, look, reading is incredible. If you can find something in my book that gives you that feeling, then yeah, I'm having a great day.
And then, of course, another question from David. Is there any books / TV series / movies that everyone agreed loved both?
I can't think of one. No. There might be one. Sorry, I'm just lifting my laptop. No there might be one. but I can't think of it. Ooh, not everyone, but I would say Lord of the Rings is as close as you're going to come.
Yeah, I
A
was
lot of
just thinking
people,
that.
yeah, a lot of people might not be too heavy on the book. I don't know a single person I've ever met who has been an avid criticizer of the films. Most people, even if they don't care, they just don't care. I've never seen someone hate them. There probably is someone who hates them, but I haven't met them. I think some people can't really read the books just from the writing style because it's obviously an older writing style. Um, but I think most people who read the books and watched the TV show and enjoyed, they either hate both of them or love both of them. So I don't think there's anyone who's loved one and hated the other that I've met.
Right.
So that's probably the closest we're going to get.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see the new series when it comes out in September on Amazon Prime. To
Oh
see
yeah, I'm ready for that.
if that maintains the kind of the gold standard, I guess, of the films.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be really, really interesting to see because I feel like the extra budget that the Wheel of Time needed. I think the Wheel of Time needed like 2 or 3 more episodes. If they had 2 or 3 more episodes, they would have time to develop characters. I think that money might have went to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Um, and I think it's going to be in the production quality of Lord of the Rings. I think there's a few things that were a bit sketchy in the production quality of Wheel of Time. And I think there won't be a single thing missing in Lord of the Rings. I would be very surprised.
yeah, it's very interesting. We got a question from Nathan. Do you have anything planned for this world after the third book, or are you moving on to a new world with new characters?
Yeah, I do. So this series is actually meant to be a 5-book series. So I have the third book that I'm hoping to release summer this year, and with a novella in the next few months as well, which is slowly starting to actually hit novel length. But I suppose when my books are like A Darkness and Light is like 240,000 words, so like I think 40,000 words isn't really a novella in this world. Um, but yeah, 5 books I think in general. It might hit a sixth, but I don't think it will. And even after those 5 books, I'll probably still, just because it's my passion, I'm probably still going to write some more novellas and stuff just to add into the history and the backstory. And so I don't think I'll ever be fully done with this world. But I think for me, this arc, this story that I'm telling will finish around 5 books. And then I have 2 new worlds that I want to jump into. One is a blend for me of heroic fantasy and horror. So I want to bring it into. I want to create like a zombie apocalypse modern times. So switch that to a vampire apocalypse, vampire outbreak in fantasy times, where the vampires do not sparkle, and it's. I want to get that mix where you have like the same heroic characters you're used to in epic fantasy, and it blend in the kind of horror aspects of the real old vampiric tales. And I want to kind of to try that. Something I'm really passionate about. I think it'd be really, really cool. I love.
Yeah.
I've said it. I said it in like my last chat that I had a while ago. I think if there's 2 genres that blend together really well when done right, it's horror and fantasy. I
Mm-hmm.
think that kind of you already have that tension from the fight scenes. So if you can get that kind of tension and mix it with your combat scenes and your little bits of horror, not enough to scare people off, but like I think that could be really good. So I have that, and I have it, and one that's kind of a mix of like sci fantasy as well that I want to do. But I'm
Right.
going to finish this series first. I think I kind of want to do that for the people who've committed to the series already, to like my readers. I kind of want to make sure that they get that finish. Um, so I'll do that first, and then I'll probably move on then.
Yeah, I've done the opposite. I've pissed off all my
Mhm.
readers because I did Oathbreaker. Some people were like, "We want the sequel now," and I'm like, "The sequel's on the back burner because I want to tell this story now." So it's still set in the
But
same world, but it's
yeah,
yeah, I've definitely angered some people with that
but
decision.
it's a thing that I was saying a while ago as well, is that it's unfair, right? And it's that you have Patrick Rothfuss and George R. R. Martin, and Patrick Rothfuss has been through a really fucking hard time. Like he has a life, he has a family, and he has mental health, and he's had a rough time. And he's trying to write his book, and he's going to do it his own time. He owes no one anything. Like he's written these books, amazing stories that have given people so much, and he'll get it out. He might not get it out, but at the same time, he owes no one anything. Like he wrote those stories for people already, but one of the big things is that for those 3 or 4 big authors who are yet to finish their series, there's hundreds and thousands of authors who finish series all the time. It's a very small sample size, but yet I think people now are just scared. I think the big profile of those authors made people scared that they'll get invested in the world and it won't finish. And I think especially with younger authors, the only reason those series aren't going to be finished is because those readers who won't read their stories till they're finished are stopping them from getting finished. Because if you're an indie author who's starting out and you're not getting the sales, you can't invest years of your life into writing books in a world where you get nothing in return. So it's quite a tough full circle there for people who are trying to start out and trying to finish the series. Like if you write the first book and only 100 people read it and they love it, but only 100 of them read it, it's very tough for you to go and invest that time into editing and writing and paying an editor and a proofreader and getting covers, and when you know that it might not return. So that can be quite a tough circle. So it's there's no real win-win for it at all.
Yeah, it's kind of crappy that way. But David with another question. There's a huge debate about The Fall. I'm glad I read it before of Blood and Fire, as I fell in love with your writing. What was that? Was that the idea?
So yeah, I don't know if you haven't read The Fall, AJ.
No, I just A Blood and Fire was my first intro to your writing. And
so The Fall is just like it's a free novella that I have, right? It's on my website and it's available when you sign up to my mailing list. So it's a real like media raise, like you drop into the middle of shit and it's just fucking pure chaos for like 25,000 words, and it's 4 viewpoints split up, just massive chaos, real drop in the deep end, all action, the whole thing. And it's gotten a great reception. But so there's a big thing on Twitter, and there's a Discord server that there's an author channel on for me, and there's people debating whether you should read it before the first book or after the first book. Because obviously in one area you jump into it really quickly, you know nothing about the world, and it's just fucking go mad. Right, and then you go to A Blood and Fire, and some of the characters who are in The Fall are in A Blood and Fire, and you kind of, oh, cool, and you realize who they are. And the other way around, you read A Blood and Fire, and then you learn the actual backstories of the characters you've already know to love. So there's 2 ways to read it. And when I was writing it, I intentionally wrote it that way because I wanted it to be both a reason to sign up to my mailing list at the end of the book, but then also to get people into my writing. So I needed to write it in a way that it could be read in either order, because I needed it to be, oh, I'll try this to see if I like Ryan's writing. And then also, oh, I want to read this book, so I'll sign up to your mailing list. And there's been a bit of a debate as to which way to read it. So for David's answer, like, was that the idea? The idea for me was that it could actually be read in either order. So there was a big Twitter poll, and I think it was like 200 something votes, and it ended up at about like basically 50. There was like 48 to like 39 or 40 or something. So it was pretty fucking close. And I was really happy with that because I didn't want there to be a clear winner. Like that's exactly where I wanted it to land, is like everyone argues. And that is perfect. Just where I want it to be.
So what was your self-publishing experience like?
Broad question, but so far I've been really good. It's
really
tough.
Good.
Like it's been good. Like, because I've made the switch to full-time writing now. And it's been very good, but it's really tough. And I think what people don't always realize is that there's more to it than writing, so much more. I spent months before releasing my first book, genuine months, like 8-9 hours a day doing research on marketing, formatting. I learned to code. I learned to build the website. I learned to like format the books. I learned to do loads and loads and loads of little bits, even business wise. And it was tough. It was really tough to try and learn all those bits. And I had to learn Photoshop properly. So like for like my novellas for The Fall and the Exile, like I designed the covers myself, whereas I get my designer to do the main books, but I had to kind of get it to a degree where they look pretty close, so that it keeps the continuity on brand. And I've really enjoyed it, and I think it can quite depend. I actually really like the marketing side, and I like the business side of it. I think that's a big touch point for a lot of indie authors. Is it depends. I would love to be writing all the time, and I try to write as much as I can. But I think if you really, really don't like the business side, and you really, really don't like marketing, it's going to be a tough job. It's going to be a very tough job. Yeah, it's really interesting to me. I love the marketing. I love the kind of getting into the psyche of how things will happen, because I think marketing in particular it's the way I look at it is, so advertising is a direct in, direct out. So advertising is how much money do I get back for the money that I spend, and whereas marketing is I'm going to put my money in here with no idea if I'll get a return except for an educated guess, and it's all about like the intangible stuff that you don't see. So I was saying to guys a while ago, they were saying about like advertising and marketing and how you get your first few reviews. And for me, like the difference in marketing is when I launched my first book, on day 2 of the launch, I set my book free for 3 days, which is meant to be like your biggest sales period. I set it free for 2 days because in my head I'm going like I'm not going to have a big sales period. No one knows my fucking book, so there was no reason for me to be sensitive about whether it was free or not. So I set it to free. I paid some promo sites, and I think it was like 2,000-3,000 downloads of the book in like 3 days, and it was free. All right, and my logic was if 10% of those people read the book, all right, that's 200 people reading the book, and if 10% of those leave a review, I now have 20 reviews. And then hopefully, and this is where it comes into the intangible, is you don't know. So then hopefully the next person to pass it sees 20 reviews and buys it, and then they might leave a review. And that's the thing. I love thinking into the mechanics of that and how it might work, and I think that's why I like the marketing side of it. But yeah, it's been good. I've enjoyed it so far, and I love the community. I really love the community. That's been massive for me.
That's the big thing too, is like I've been kind of embraced by the self-publishing community, and I've had like doing these author talks and just talking with other authors. I'm surprised how accessible everyone is and how willing to talk about their stuff they are.
But it's so cool. Like even this, like I keep saying, and that's only because I was having a talk like 2 hours ago. But for me, even this talking to you right now, like I started all this during the pandemic, so like I haven't gotten to talk to people. Like I've typed with them, but speaking with them. And at the same time, I moved to New Zealand, so I'm not in like I was near the UK, so I was right beside one of the biggest hubs for all of this in the UK and the US, and I feel kind of isolated from it. But getting to actually talk to people and speak is really cool for me. That still feels new to me, and getting to meet authors and just chatting shit, like you said, just about general stuff to do with books and publishing, and yeah, the community is fantastic. It's so good. That's a big difference
and
like,
for me. For those of you who are watching, who just I'm going to do this little shameless self plug here again. February 10th, I'm actually talking with Bloodsong author, New York Times bestseller Anthony Ryan.
Oh, nice.
And he was, I was super stunned that he was like, absolutely, I'll come on your YouTube channel. Me, who have like 5 subscribers. And I'm like, oh my God, like, thank you so much. And so, I'm excited to talk to him. But yeah, like you said, the book community, people are just so accessible, so willing just to talk about their art. And like, it's absolutely overwhelming how I've been embraced. And I'm sure you felt the same way with the community.
It's been incredible. Yeah, really incredible. It's weird because I have my fiance here in the other room, but she's always laughing at me because I feel it's like, I don't know about you. Did you play a lot of computer games as a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I use the word of pride now, but I was a fucking massive nerd. Like, as in, I would be up online games till like 5 a.m, like, all the time. And I feel like this has brought me back to that in a more socially acceptable way. Because I now have friends, people that I would consider friends. I spend more time talking to them during the day than I would some of my actual friends from home. Just because right now as well, I suppose when you have a commonality, it makes you chat a lot more. So we have like books and stuff, and we're talking about that all the time. But they're people I've never met. So that's where it goes back to that online game. Like I'm talking to these people who are like in the States and in all different places in the world and in Canada. And I'm going, I haven't met these people, but like I spend more time with them than anybody else. Yeah. And it's weird. It's cool.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of days ago, you were on TBRCon with I believe David Williams. How was that experience? I didn't able to catch the Norse inspired fantasy panel. I was working when it was going on, but how was that experience and talking with those other authors?
It was really, really cool. And I think it was funny because I was a little bit nervous going in because all the other authors on it, their books they're Norse books. Like they're very much in Norse mythology and Norse lore, and whereas mine is more Norse inspired. So I have a lot of Norse inspiration in my books, and even I have the language that I've created. It's not fully formed yet, but a lot of the conjugations and verbs and nouns and stuff. And that's heavily based off Old Norse words as roots, and also off modern Danish. And then also when I go into it, there's a lot of Norse inspiration just in the way they treat the gods and the way the relationships are carried out. But I wouldn't be as heavily Norse as the other guys. But going into it, it was fantastic. And I think what David has done and what Fanfi Addict have done, which is very cool, is seamlessly blend indie with trad. And there's no division. So like I went into that, and you have Genevieve, who I believe is trad published, and Thild, or Thilda, I think it's right, because I don't know if she will kill me, but I feel like she has the combat skills to kill me if I get it wrong. Like she's trad published, and you go in, and myself's there, and Tamandra Whitecastle's there, and Dave and DW Ross are there, and we're all indie, and it's just not even a thing. It's just you're on the same panel, you're having a talk, it's great. And like Anthony Ryan was doing a few of them as well. Michael Sullivan's doing some of them, and I actually believe in the Morally Grey Characters one coming tomorrow. Joe Abercrombie's going to be on the panel as well.
Oh,
yeah, you got some really big authors,
Yeah.
and some great indie authors, and they've just mixed them seamlessly, and
Oh, yeah.
that's been a great experience. Like to get us onto the panel and to actually talk to other authors, and it's one of those things that, like I said, I haven't got a chance to do much. Talk craft
Mhm.
properly with other authors, like to actually. In this is what I mean when you say like really big nerd. Like my ideal night right now would be to sit around like 5 or 6 like cool authors in a bar, get drunk as shit till 5 a.m. And I'm not talking about like football and stuff. I'm just talking about like fancy
Books.
craft and lore and books. And I want that so badly. Yeah.
I know. Like, I wish COVID would end and like we could actually have like fantasy conventions, because like I would be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I'm genuinely want to get back to the UK. I'm trying to get back to UK and Ireland in October, but it just depends if COVID allows me back into New Zealand if I go. And I want to try and catch some conventions over there. That'd be something I'm so excited to do.
Yeah. Nathan asked the question, who are some of your favorite authors? You've been compared to John Gwynne, which is what drew me to your series in the first place. We kind of answered this, but we'll just go over it again.
Yeah, John Gwynn's up there, 100%. John Gwynne was like an auto-buy author for me. I love John Gwynne. When I read Malice, and he's actually one of the people as well. I didn't even say this. It kind of inspired me to want to write quickly as well. So what I loved, I picked up John Gwynne's book, and then I read it. I read Malice, and then it had the second one came out. A second one was out as well, and I read that, and then it was like I realized there's like only a year between the releases. Like in the indie world, there's such a crazy pressure to keep releasing, or you're not relevant anymore. Whereas in the trad world, you can take 3 years between a book. If you're a big author, your publisher will just do a huge marketing spend for the launch of your book, and everyone remembers your series. But that doesn't happen with indie. But John Gwynne was like, I don't need that. I'm going to release a book every year anyway. So I love that. Yeah, I think some of my favorite authors, the same before. So like Naomi Novik was massive for me for Dragons, and McCaffrey. It's been a big thing for me. Darren Shan is an Irish author who has released an amazing loads of books, but I religiously read his books as a kid. He had Darren Shan, the Cirque du Freak books about Darren Shan being a half vampire, and it was fucking cool as shit. He had the Demonada series, which is amazing. And obviously, John Gwynne, Robert Jordan, Tolkien are like everything for me. And I actually love Justin Lee Anderson. He's now signed a trad deal, but he was the first indie book I ever read. Love his work so much. I remember reading that book, and that book was like a lesson on how to plot twist. Like, I think I was in like maybe 90% through that book, and I was actually pissed off. I was like, there are so many inconsistencies. What is going on? This is just annoying. And then I finished the book, and I was like, you fucking bastard. It was like mind blown. It was like everything I thought was an inconsistency was perfectly placed. And I can see why some people might stop and go, oh, I don't like that book because of this. But if you see it through to the end, it's like a lesson in how to write payoff, like how to stick a landing. That was just like done. Yeah. Very well.
That's awesome. David has a question. Do you purposely release paperback or hardback at the same time? I only read paperback, as you know how busy the dart is, and it's easier to carry, so paperback is great.
Yeah, I do. So like in trad world, they release the hardback first because they want to sell the most expensive copy to everyone who'll buy a copy. And if the paperback isn't available, you have to buy the hardback. So it's very much geared towards making money instantly. And I totally get that. But I think for me, when I release, it's all about accessibility. And that's actually, I didn't really have that word properly in my head until the last talk. And there was one of the people out in the chat called Trin who was talking about it. And accessibility is massive for me. I think she brought up about dyslexia, and my mom is dyslexic. And even when I was getting the audiobooks, I'd love to release them at the same time, but there's a big gap between, like, when I finish the book, it only takes a month for me. Then once it's done completely, it only takes a month. I leave a month gap, so I get my advanced review copies out, like a month to a month and a half, and then the book's released. Whereas if I waited for audiobook, it would be like another 4 or 5 months. But I think audiobook for me is massive because you have people who just can't read. Maybe someone who is visually impaired or someone who has dyslexia, they're not comfortable reading. And for that same reason, I like to get the hardback and paperback out because I just want I want as many accessible mediums as you can possibly have to read the book. And for like what David said, they mightn't want a hardback because it's just too hefty to carry and to stick in your bag. So people want it on a train. There's no reason for me to hold the hardback, or to hold the paperback. Just get it out there. And some people like to have the physical copies again, like with dyslexia or with any other issues with e-readers. Some people just don't like e-readers and they want to read on paper, and you can have larger print. Obviously an e-reader you can expand it, but there's a point when you expand it, the page just doesn't look good. So yeah, it's definitely a purposeful thing. I want to get as many mediums as I can out straight away. I don't want to funnel someone towards a particular medium. I try and put as much into my hardbacks as I can. I try to add extra illustrations. I try to design them so there's as much value in them as possible, so that when people do buy the hardbacks, they really get the value for money in them. But I release the paperback at the same time.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Accessibility is key. I wanted to release my audiobook for Oathbreaker right at the start, but my narrator bailed on me. And then, so then I had to basically start from the ground up, like 2 months into my launch. I'm like, shit. Because like first what happened was I said, it's going to be 2 months after my launch, my audiobook's going to go. 2 months come, his hard drive collapses, loses everything. So he restarts. Another 2 months go by. Then he's like, I can't do this. Then I spent another like a month and a half finding a new author or a new narrator. And then finally, like 3 months later, I finally get my audiobook out. And it was just like, oh, but thankfully it's been well received, and just be like, oh, it was a nightmare trying to get that thing going.
It's one of those things. I think my business model for me has been to make things as passive as I can. So like I was at first doing all my signed copies myself. So I was signing them and posting them out and stuff. And then the Broken Binding took it over. I get a little bit less money, but the guys are amazing. And like they fulfill all the orders, stock everything, list everything, send it all out. And I don't have to do it anymore, which means I can write. And it was the same with the audiobook. Podium came to me and they wanted to produce the audiobook. And obviously I get less money when it comes out because they buy the rights to the audiobook, but it means they do everything. And it's passive. And when all that shit happens, I don't have to deal with it because I would just be so stressed. So I can only imagine, because obviously doing it yourself means then you get more of the money. So it's a bit more worth it, but it's so stressful. I would be pulling my hair out if that happened to me.
Oh yeah, it was brutal. Like there was just nights I just wasn't sleeping. I was like, oh my God, where am I going to find another narrator who is as good? And I'm just like, imagine. Oh my God. Yeah. And then David, do you do a recap in book 2? If so, thank you. If not, why not?
Yeah, I do. I think on the why not, even though I do one, I can imagine a lot of authors don't do it because it's tough. It's really tough. I wrote mine and I was pulling my hair out. It was really hard because what you're essentially asking an author to do is take a year or more or less of their life to write 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 plus word book, but then kind of defeat the whole purpose of the book by summarizing the entire thing in like 2 pages. And it's really hard to do. It's really hard to take something that takes 200,000 words to tell, but then summarize it all in like a page or 2. And especially it's tough because then you also have to think back and pick out the points. So the way I did my recap was I wanted to engineer the recap so that whoever read it, they picked up on the things they would need to know. So like there's characters who are important characters who aren't really mentioned in the recap. And there's storylines that were important storylines that aren't really mentioned because there's other characters who I want them to remember. So when you're reading this book, you need to remember this character and this kind of thing, but doing it subtly. I think there's 2 ways to do it. I did like, if you go online and go to like the Lycanius trilogy, they have like quite a thorough recap in those ones. And I did it that way. Then you go to Mark Lawrence's one, and which is great because he's a real straight shooter to the point. And his recap is like, remember in book 1, this person died, this person died, this person died, this place is cool, this place is cool, remember this name, and just bullet points. And like it's just as effective, just a totally different way of doing it. But yeah, I had a lot of people ask me to do one as well, so I was like, yeah, I should. I think you get a lot of props for doing it.
Yeah, I've never read a book where there is a recap, and then now since I've
Yeah.
joined Book Twitter, I've seen that it's in a demand, and I'm like, maybe for my Oathbreaker sequel, I should actually do a recap.
I would definitely do one. I think you there's nothing bad that comes from it, and you just gain props for taking the time for it, because I think, especially at the minute, there's a bit of a, I would think, bit of a toxic thing, and that word can be overused, but I think there's a bit of a toxic thing for a lot of readers in a competition of how many books they can read in a year. And look, it's great for authors because readers are buying loads of books, but when you're trying to squeeze that many books in a year, like you have readers who might read 100 books in between your first book and your second book. So sometimes they might not pick up your second book then because they don't have the time in their busy schedule to reread the first book. So when you have that recap, they're like, oh, okay, I can do this then. I don't have to reread the first book. I can just read the recap. And yeah, I think that's a big thing. I think you'd be quite surprised how big that is. There's quite a lot of readers who will genuinely push off the second book because they have a number of books to hit in the year, and if they reread your first one, they won't hit it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's one of those things.
Yeah. And then, are you a planner or are you a pantser when it comes to plotting your book?
I wouldn't say I'm either. I'd say I'm both, and I think it's like subdivided the planner and pantser, but I don't think anyone is either. Some people love the idea of saying they're a pantser, but to me, when you're a pantser, that first draft that you pantsed, that's just a really, really in-depth plot. So because it's a framework, you're going to go back and edit it now. So what you've done is you're not a pantser, you're a really extreme plotter. And that's the way I look at it, because it's all plotting, and it's just different depths of how far ahead you go. So like for me, I don't like go like line by line in a plot and then write. What I would do is, before I start a book, I know what the start is, I know where they'll be in the middle, and I know exactly what the last line will be. So I know the line the book will end on. And then what I'll do is I'll take the character arcs that I have, or the stories. So say I have 5 points of view, I'll chart out those points of view, and I will just pick like the main things that need to happen. So this character's here, he's going here. And to get here, and to be the person he's going to be here, these 5 major events need to happen. And then I'll pants in between those events. And I think what it means to me is, when you do that, your story won't go like this. So like right. you're able to actually, those beats keep you on track. So you're going off and you're writing a really cool scene, but then you realize that you need to go back to this beat. So it keeps you in a reasonably straight line going from start to end, and it's harder to go off on tangents, and it keeps your plot moving a bit easier. For me, I find that's way better to stay on point when I'm writing. So that would be kind of like my level of it.
Right. For me, I plot or plan basically the skeleton of the plot of the book. Yeah. And then how I get there, like you said, you just kind of pants it.
And then, I think a lot of people are like that. I think we subdivide it out, but I think most people do that. I would be surprised if there's an author who, when they're writing, something new doesn't pop up. No matter how much you plot. Like, I had a character who was just a captain in one of the armies, and he's now probably one of the favorite characters in the series. He's an antagonist. He's definitely the bad guy. Not the bad guy, but one of the bad guys, and he is absolutely one of the favorites. And I was just writing him, and he was just a generic captain. And then all of a sudden, while I was writing, when I was typing, I made him flip a coin. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. And now this coin has become a massive part of his personality. And then all of a sudden I stopped, went aside, and I wrote about 400 years of backstory for him in a little other profile thing, and then came back and then went through. And that was like one of those things, just happens. I'm writing, and then I had to make that flip decision in my brain. Do I go down this path or not? I think a lot of authors do that. I'd be very surprised. It doesn't happen to everyone.
Like when I reread my book Oathbreaker not too long ago, and the only way I can describe it as I'm rereading it is kind of like Heath Ledger says it in The Dark Knight in Christopher Nolan's movie. Batman movie. I'm like a dog chasing cars. I don't know what I'd ever do if I caught one. I just do things, and I feel like that's kind of what I do. That because there's a lot of like red herrings in that book where people are like, "That's going to be something," and it just ends up not coming to fruition in that book. Maybe in the sequel, it'll come to fruition.
And that's one of the things I think is really good. Is then if you go back with those things that don't come, like for instance, I have a prologue in Blood and Fire, all right, and it seems almost completely disconnected, and I do leave a small tip in the middle of the book. So in the prologue, you'll read, and it's like the Knights of Acheron, and they're there, and they're in the forest, and there's this guy who's dying, and they're talking to him. And then midway through the book, their name comes back up again, but they're not seen. But that one scene at the start of the book is pivotal to a huge thing in the second book. And I think I did that intentionally. But there's other things in the book where I put them in. And then when I got to the second book, I was like, oh, I can really make some cool connections here. And I think that's part of it. Like just using what you've put in the first book. You don't always have to have a plan for it at first. When you go back and read it and you go, yeah, I can make this story even better by referencing this again and creating a spin on it when it comes up.
Yeah, for sure. Drawing a blank here, but I do have a question I ask every author that comes on my show. Would you rather fight a chicken every time you get into your house or an orangutan once a year?
Chicken.
That seems to be the general consensus.
But you know why? Because we've all been trained. We've all played Skyrim. Every single one of us walk into the house and kick the chicken out the window. The orangutan will kill you first year.
That's well. I've had about 3 authors say they'll take the orangutan. They said if I can train and work out, I could take the orangutan. And I was
not bare hands. No matter how much you train, you are not winning.
And that's why I was always in orangutan camp. And then I went on Google and looked up like the tail of the tape and seen what. And I was like, yeah, I'm taking that chicken.
Rip you apart.
Yeah, I said, I'm taking that chicken every time.
You come in, one kick, chicken is gone.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Even
unless you're like in that river town in Skyrim, and then the whole town turns on you.
Yeah. As long as it's one chicken and it's your house.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I learned that lesson the hard way because like when I was playing Skyrim the first time, my friends told me you got to kill this chicken and then loot the breast from it. I'm like, okay. And then the entire town just like it's like at the very start of the game, this entire town just turns hostile on you, and I'm like, what the hell is going on?
The town's pride is chicken.
I know.
You got to be very careful.
Well, that is all my questions. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for joining me, Ryan.
Wow, got to have.
Where can people buy your book? A Blood and Fire and the Bound and Broken series?
Yeah, everywhere basically. The ebook's only on Amazon. The audio book is on Audible, but like physical copies, you could get them on Amazon. You get them on Book Depository, Barnes and Noble. They're in Waterstones, WH Smith. Any of the basic book stuff, and any indie stores will order them in as well. And all the signed copies are on the Broken Binding, so they do like all my signed copies for hardbacks and stuff. Awesome. Really great guys.
Yes, I need to get in touch with them for my books.
Lovely people, really nice people.
Well, thank you so much again for everyone tuning in, and thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day, Ryan. I know you just went from one talk to another, but
it's been great.
Yeah, it's very awesome. Oh, we got a question from David right at the end. Ryan, with you hoping to return, would you consider having a piss up / indie festival?
I don't know if I could arrange an indie festival, but I definitely planning multiple piss ups. As in, I'm going to go back to the UK, and I'm going to go to the UK, and I want to get to Ireland as well. I have a friend/family wedding, so I want to get over to Ireland, and I'm definitely going to meet up with any Irish authors that I can, and just people who in the general book community. Definitely a few people in Ireland I want to meet up with, and then I want to get to the UK as well, and I have quite a few places that I need to get drunk in. So that'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to that. And yes, Nathan, the Broken Binding are fantastic. They're just lovely people, and yeah, it sucks for me living where I do because there's like no authors here. Like there is Andy Peliquin's Canada, but I don't know how far he is from you.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everyone
in Canada, but it's a big country.
Everyone says I'm in Canada, and they live in like Toronto or Vancouver, which is like 16 hours away. And I'm like, ugh. Like, why can't anyone be in my hometown of like 100,000 people that I can just talk to?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Like, yeah, Canada is massive. I think people forget that too. And even in America, people are like, "Oh, it's America. Like, you're all American." It's like America's a continent.
Yeah.
America is like, going from like Oklahoma to New York is like going from Ireland to Ukraine. Like, it's a fucking big place. But yeah, no, I do miss that now coming to New Zealand, because if I'd started this and I was in Ireland, I could easily have flown to the UK whenever I wanted, and met up with loads of people. So now it has to be like a trip.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm more than willing to make it. I can't wait to actually meet a few people face to face.
Yes. Hopefully when the pandemic finally comes to an end, whenever that will be. Yeah. But
2 years in running.
2 years in running. We're on season 3 of the pandemic.
Oh my God.
But anyways, we'll stop going down a dour down depressing hole, and we'll try and end on a positive note. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in, and thanks a lot, Ryan, for coming and talking to me.
Thanks for having me.
You.
It's been really fun.
See you, everyone.
See you guys.